On Thursday, state lawmakers start discussing ways to avoid a disaster that some say is just waiting to happen.
You might have heard that a lot of people are worried about trains carrying explosive oil from North Dakota through our state, but no one has looked at the issue like the Fox 9 investigators do tonight.
So what would an explosion mean in your town? Here's Trish Van Pilsen.
Here's why this matters to Minnesota more than any other state. Minnesota is the main thoroughfare for oil cars running from the Bakken region in North Dakota to refineries out east. 400 miles of track weave through the state, sneaking through cities big and small, including Minneapolis and St. Paul.
A Minneapolis rail yard says it all.
There are a lot of tankers.
A lot of tankers.
You know what's in them?
I would think oil.
It is the most flammable oil ever to come from the ground, hurtling past in tankers, 85% of which are not, by government standards, strong enough to safely hold something that explosive.
18, 19, 20.
And yet,
21.
many of those who live just feet from the line that parallels Hollywood Avenue
21.
No.
don't think about the risks.
I guess I'm really not that concerned about it.
But when they do,
Oh my God, that's just frightening.
you can't help but picture this northeast Minneapolis street as the set in a real-life disaster film.
That's devastating just to think about.
Different tracks, same worries, actually keep
They're coming at 1, 2 in the morning.
the chief of the Big Lake Police Department up at night.
I lay awake and think about what if.
What if what's happened in other towns happened
See how close everything is to the rail.
along the tracks that split his town in two?
You'd be looking at a large amount of fatalities, a large amount of critically injured people, and an incident that would be incredibly manpower intensive to first just bring under control.
It's not out of the realm of possibility. In the past year, there have been 3 rail explosions involving oil cars. Alabama, North Dakota, Lac-Mégantic, Quebec. The only one to happen in a populated area was in Quebec. That's the one that got the Big Lake police chief really thinking.
The first thing you can do is apply that exact same footprint to happening in your community and what kind of an impact it would have.
So that's what the Fox 9 investigators decided to do. We applied the footprint of the Lac-Mégantic, Quebec derailment not to Big Lake, but to Wayzata. Why?
You see this on movies, but this is amazing.
Because a train did derail here not that many years ago.
We very much dodged a bullet.
It was 2010. The oil boom had just begun. The cars that derailed carried coal. But what if the freight had been oil and there had been a spark?
It would cause a huge problem.
Lieutenant Mike Murphy with the Wayzata Police Department does not think this is a far-fetched scenario to consider.
I think, yeah, someday that could be us. It's not going to be good, and we're going to have to deal with that perhaps.
So what exactly would that look like? This is a bird's eye view of the area surrounding the 2010 Wayzata train derailment. For our scenario, let's imagine that oil cars go off the track here where the coal cars did. Given the wrong set of circumstances, there would be an explosion and this entire area would look like this.
Lac-Mégantic, Quebec burst into flames and chaos after the 102-car freight train crumpled downtown. Those people closest to the blast were simply incinerated. At least 3 people gone without a trace. In our Wayzata scenario, that would include Richard Bray, who sits at a desk with the track at his back. The 2010 train derailed just feet from where he now works, although he didn't work here at the time.
Do you have any concerns about that?
No, not really. If something like that happens, it happens. And I think we would rely on the fact that the train and the regulations around that they're taking caution. They seem to be cautious when they come through the community.
In Quebec, the blast zone was about a mile wide, meaning that anyone who didn't get out of that area died. The death toll was 47. The fire claimed 40 buildings.
Back in Wayzata, the fire would spread quickly and in unexpected ways. This is a map of Wayzata's sewer system. What they learned in Quebec was that burning oil ran into the sewers,
where it could spread stealthily underneath the city. Flames could leap up through manholes and into homes through drain pipes.
In Wayzata, we measure 1/2 mile in all directions from the crash site. That includes a 42-unit apartment building, the headquarters of TCF Bank, several office buildings. To the east, blocks of shops ending at a busy ice cream shop. To the south, an $8 million mansion. To the north and west, neighborhoods with dozens of homes, 2 churches, one of which houses a preschool, a park, and Wayzata West Middle School with an enrollment of 750 kids.
Everybody has to be evacuated from that area.
Correct.
Can you do that?
You have to do what I would say is, yes, they can be evacuated, and you have to do the best that you can to evacuate them. But I want to just come back to this. Even in that scenario, a 1/2 mile is not an unreasonable expectation in a large-scale explosion or hazardous material incident.
Now consider this possibility. Let's say the explosion takes place just a bit up the track, say right here. Now the blast zone includes a police and fire department, and in many small towns, police and fire are near the tracks.
And if we were all wiped out, of course, that would cause a huge problem. It would cause a huge problem.
Help would have to come from the closest town or county. Just how ready are communities around the state? For starters, some say they'd like to know exactly what's rolling through their town and how often. The railroads don't have to warn cities when hazardous materials are passing through, though individual cars are marked with placards.
That's a real problem, and I think is another gap that we're going to be looking to address here at the legislature.
Lawmaker Frank Ornstein says it's hard to get good information about oil tankers, even about how much of the explosive oil runs the rails in Minnesota. The State Department of Transportation says only 6 to 10 trains carrying oil cars a day pass through the state, a number that seems impossibly low to anyone who lives or works near the tracks.
You come up to a rail car, all protective housings are going to have a security seal on it.
General hazardous material training exercises,
make sure these are all hand tight,
like this one in St. Paul, are common.
There we go.
Few have trained specifically for oil tanker explosions and fires.
If it's bubbling out of there, then
we called 20 departments. Only 4 have done specialized training.
Basic fundamentals are what we've tried to work on.
So the placard would also tell us that.
In fact, many emergency disaster plans were written before the height of the oil boom. Wayzata's most recent is from 2011.
They're all very unique and very different situations, but in my mind, the one that I would fear the most is having the large explosion and fire over the top of everything.
There are things that affect both the likelihood and severity of a derailment.
Over 99.99% of the hazardous material shipped on BNSF makes it to its destination safely without incident.
First, the speed of the train. The faster, the more likely and more serious. According to the state DOT, the maximum average speed of trains in the metro area is 38 miles an hour. BNSF Railroad says it hasn't asked federal regulators for speed increases to accommodate the increased oil demand. But Canadian Pacific did for trains running through Plymouth, Crystal, and New Hope, doubling train speeds from 20 to 40 miles an hour. The railroad says it changed the tracks so they could safely accommodate those speeds. The elevation of the train matters too. If tankers filled with oil derail and fall from a trestle like this one looming over the busy U of M Dinkytown neighborhood, the odds of a big explosion and fire are much greater. And finally, track maintenance matters too, which is one reason the man who sits closest to our simulated disaster doesn't spend much time worrying about it happening in real life.
You get to see the maintenance that they're doing and the management of the track, and they're constantly working on the rails. And
Thinking that way is a luxury emergency officials simply don't have.
If you think that nothing's ever going to happen with all those oil tankers running through town,
That would be a total miscalculation.
the situation has become so worrisome, the National Transportation Safety Board has issued a series of unprecedented recommendations, including asking railroads to reroute trains with hazardous materials around populated areas and making tanker cars more puncture resistant. None of that takes care of the immediate danger. I'm Trish Van Pilsum for the Fox 9 Investigators.
And new tonight, federal regulators issued an emergency order requiring tests of crude oil. The point is to determine how likely the cargo is to explode or catch fire before being shipped.